Good evening, everyone. You are looking good tonight. I was telling somebody that the real excuse for this is to see whether people in Silicon Valley know how to dress up. And the answer is, we do. So, as long as it's only once a year. On behalf of the trustees and the staff and the volunteers of the Computer History Museum, I want to welcome you tonight to the 30th anniversary edition of the CHM Fellows Awards. We have issued so far 77 awards. The premier edition of that award was in 1987 at the Computer History Museum, which was, at the Computer Museum, which was our predecessor in Boston. And we gave that award to Admiral Grace Murray Hopper as our first recipient. My former mentor, Bud Lawson, who worked with her, called her Amazing Grace. And Amazing Grace is actually getting a lot of airplay these days. The latest is, I don't know if you know this, that one of Yale's residential colleges is now named after Grace Hopper. The most delicious part of that is that the students immediately started calling themselves grasshoppers. Grace Hopper. There's also a nice tie-in to the famous bug story, which I'm sure most of you know, that Grace took the moth that had been preventing the Harvard Mark II from working, pasted it into the logbook, and wrote underneath it, "First example of the computer bug found." We have since found a lot of computer bugs. Our goal in doing these Fellows Awards is the same for 30 years. It is to make heroes out of technologists and to put them on a pedestal and to celebrate their achievements. So people have heroes other than sports figures and movie stars and, dare I say, politicians. We give this honor, but one thing we can't do is guarantee immortality. And I note with sadness the passing in recent weeks of two of our fellows from the class of 2013, Bob Taylor at the age of 85 and Harry Husky at the age of 101. When Harry was here in 2013, he gave a great talk and got a standing ovation, which he well deserved. 85 and 101, that's really good. I have this theory that people who are associated with the computer industry actually live longer than average. And I haven't crunched the numbers yet to prove that, but I believe it to be true. We have many distinguished guests here, including fellows of the museum. I'm not going to try to list them because I might miss some. I do want to point out a guest that you may not know. His name is George Keremijev. I'm not sure I've got the pronunciation right. But George and his wife, Barbara, started a museum of computing in Bozeman, Montana. They are the founders and proprietors of that museum. And I have to tell you that it is the second best computer museum in the world. Sorry about that, George. It is really amazing, and if you ever want to take a trip and want to go visit Yellowstone National Park, you absolutely must take a side trip to visit George's museum, and George and Barbara will be there and give you a warm welcome, and it is amazing, so please do that. I've been doing this computer museum, computer history stuff for 21 years now, and that encourages long-term thinking. I've always liked the title of our exhibit downstairs, Revolution, the first 2,000 years of computing, because it tells you that it's been going on for longer than you might have thought, and that it is not done yet. It's still going on. There might be a second 2,000 years of computing. It's also in our mission. Our mission is to preserve and present for posterity the artifacts and the stories of the information age. Posterity. But what does that really mean? How long is posterity? I don't think there will be many people in the audience who will recognize the name Hendrik van Loon. He was a Dutch writer and historian in the first half of the 20th century who wrote a book called The Story of Mankind in 1921. Now, it was ostensibly a children's book, but it's actually wonderful for adults to read. And he illustrated it with line drawings that he had made, and the first drawing in the book is of a mountain. And the caption is, "High up in the north, in a land called Svithjob, there stands a rock. It is 100 miles high and 100 miles wide. Once every 1,000 years, a little bird comes to sharpen its beak on the rock. When that rock has been worn away, then a single day of eternity will have gone by. Now that's a long time. Now the engineer in me says, okay, that's fine, it's very poetic, very evocative, but how long is it really? Well, it turns out there is a nerdy professor in the University of Manchester who did some experiments with bird beaks and rocks and tried to figure out each time he sharpens it, how much of a cubic millimeter does it actually wear away? And he calculated that the single day of eternity is actually 4 times 10 to the 27th years. So now you know. Now there's actually a little bit of a problem because the Earth is only 10 to the 9th years old, but let's not go there. The good news is for the computer history business, we don't have to worry about timescales that are that long. Now the computer is a big deal. I mean, it is the amplifier for the mind, the way the engines of the Industrial Revolution were the amplifiers of the body. We, though, are privileged to be living in a unique time. From a distance, this will look like a point in time, but it's a step function. Before 1950, there were no computers. Now, and forevermore, there are more computers than there are people, and they have transformed the way we live. Something extraordinary has happened in our lifetimes, and we owe it to the people who will come after us 50, 100, 500 years from now to try to explain what it is that happened. That's why we do what we do. That's the reason why we do so many oral histories, so you can hear the pioneers talking. That's why we collect and interpret and explain the 150,000 artifacts in our collection, both physical and digital, that help tell the story. That's the reason why we're building a long-term stable institution on a secure financial footing that will endure beyond the founders and those of us who are involved now. Our Fellows program is one of the most important legacies because it calls attention to the people who created that technology. To use Arthur C. Clarke's words, the technology is so sufficiently advanced that it looks like magic. Consider the 4 people that we're honoring today. We have someone who helped create the internet, which half the people on the planet use. Someone who made writing software accessible to everyone. Someone who unleashed the power of computing for easy use by engineers and scientists. And someone who helped put humans in space and on the moon. These are incredible accomplishments. We will devote most of the evening today to talking about the accomplishments and celebrating the accomplishments of those fellows. But I do need to end with 30 seconds about an upcoming change at the Computer History Museum. Many of you know, but some of you may not. Our CEO, John Holler, has decided that 9 great years are enough, and he will be stepping down from the job this year. John has presided over amazing growth. We built 2 blockbuster exhibitions and many smaller ones. We bought our 3rd building. We established 3 new centers. We expanded live programming. We made education a priority. We broadened our audience and increased our donor base. He and the team have transformed this institution into a far stronger one, and we are grateful for his leadership. Of course, we're now looking for the next great CEO, and if any of you have an idea of who that might be, please come talk to me. We'll also figure out a way to keep John involved, but with a little less intensity than it takes to be running the show, which John has done magnificently for 9 years. But for the moment, the intensity is still there. He is still our CEO, and he is still running the show. Please welcome to the stage the one and only John Holler.
That's so wonderful, Lynn. It just really is an amazing set of remarks. I think about my serving 9 years and a bird sharpening its beak on a rock for one day every eternity. It's a very humbling comparison, let me tell you. So I'm grateful for that. The beating heart of this institution is Lynn Shustak. Anyone who knows the museum, who has been a part of it, knows he is the man. And every year at Fellows, he stands up and he says something amazing and inspiring. And for years I've said, there's going to be a year when he's not going to do that. And every year he does it, and it's such a wonderful part of the tradition. I am so grateful to the board, to the community. All of you are represented here tonight, many more who are not in the room. We had a very long waiting list to get into Fellows this year. And I'm just so proud of what we've done together. Lynn said it was a team effort, and it has been a team effort, and I just think the museum is positioned to go on to amazing and great things. And it should, because it's telling the most transformational story in human history. And we are the only institution in the world created specifically to do that. So time and the storyline of computing are on our side, and I'm just so honored and consider it to be such a privilege to have had a chance to serve for 9 years. But tonight is not about that. Tonight is about the wonderful Hall of Fellows inductees in the class of 2017. They're up here behind me. Lynn began to talk about what they're doing, and I want to take a few minutes to welcome all of them and all of you tonight. Lynn said you looked great. You do look great. This is one of the sparkling evenings in Silicon Valley. I have a tradition. The hashtag is Fellows 2017. So if you check that out, do a little panorama here. There you go. So if you want to know how good you look, just check hashtag Fellows 2017. And you'll be there in a few minutes. Please post to Facebook. You can send your dinner to Instagram. You can Snapchat your friends and your family so that you'll know at the party of the year. And networks and code are all about what enable us to do that. And they're usually in the background. But as Lynn said tonight, the brilliance and the ingenuity and the creativity and, frankly, the humanity and good humor of our fellows are fully on display. Alan Cooper, Margaret Hamilton, Cleve Moler, and Larry Roberts. As we live through one of the most transformational times in human history, they have had an impact, and they are unsung heroes. The Fellows Awards are about changing all of that, as Lynn said, and it's an inspiration and an honor to talk about people who are part of the history and the impact of computing and have us all now understanding the implications for the future. Every year, Fellows represents a lot of hard work by a lot of people, and I want to say thank you to everyone who has been involved. First of all, our good friends at Accenture. Paul Doherty, who is the tremendous trustee on our board and also so important to the Accenture organization, helps make this possible. And I want to thank you as the Chief Technology and Innovation Officer, Paul, for everything that you've done to make this possible. You will hear from Paul later this evening. I want to say thank you to our fellow sponsor, MathWorks, which of course is honoring its co-founder, Cleve Moler, tonight. I want to thank the many, many trustees who are here tonight. I've loved working with you. I have said every night when I've been up here, I think we have one of the best nonprofit boards in the country, starting with Lynn and then including everyone who's on our large 45-member board. It's not quite 45 now, but there are 45 seats on the board, and that you're just instrumental to making all of this happen. I want to say thank you to Cynthia Holliday-Loosely, who annually serves as chairman of the Fellow Awards. So Cynthia, thank you. I want to thank Peggy Burke, whose wonderful team at 1185 Design, including Michelle Hallam, contributes all of the graphics, the amazing graphics that we see every year, including those wonderful posters which hang from the two-story elevator down in the lobby. I want to give special thanks to Valerie Alston and Karina Sweet, who produce these amazing evenings, and our media director, John Plute. We have a media team who produces all of our media. You're going to see the films, or a little bit of the films that they excerpt from the oral histories that we take of the fellows every year tonight, and Allegra, who provides all of the production support. And speaking of wonderful trustees, a big thank you to the vice chairman of our board, Dave House, whose House Family Vineyards provides all the wine for these wonderful dinners. Thank you, Dave, and for your generosity. I'm going to take the risk that Lynn wouldn't take. I'm going to name the fellows who are here tonight. Don Chamberlain, Whit Diffie, Ed Feigenbaum, Don Knuth, and Alan Kay. Welcome to all of you. I may have left someone out. but I do want to say a special thank you to them. And thank you to everybody who is involved in the fellow selection process. How do we select the fellows? You nominate the fellows. That's what makes it such a special process. Public nominations are the first step, and you can go on our website at computerhistory.org/fellow awards, and that's where you begin the process. We have an independent jury who makes the ranking of the fellow nominees from the public nominations, and that's how it all begins. So please do, if you have a fellow in mind, go online and submit a nomination. It's been quite a year at the museum since we last saw you at Fellows 2016, and I run what's called the fastest 3 minutes in sports, and so this is a quick review of everything that's happened in the museum in the last 12 months. On that night, we inducted Dave Cutler, the wizard of operating systems at Microsoft, Lee Felsenstein, the pioneer of social networking and personal computing, and Phil Morby, the inventor of the Verilog design system. In June, we launched our new Exponential Center on Entrepreneurship. Marguerite Gong Hancock hosted a 2-day launch conference, which began by honoring 5 pioneers of the tech startup ecosystem: John Doerr, Larry Sonsini, Regis McKenna, Arthur Rock, and Jay Last. And Gordon Moore, who could not be here in person, was the 6th honoree. The next day, Regis took us behind the scenes of his groundbreaking marketing strategies for helping some of the world's great entrepreneurial companies become just that. And John Doerr sat down with MyFitnessPal founders and brothers Mike and Albert Lee, who built MyFitnessPal.com into a company purchased by Under Armour for $475 million. Exponential is an important contributor to our ongoing CHM Live speaker series. Author Duncan Clark headlined an exponential evening about his book Alibaba, the House That Jack Ma Built. Legendary entrepreneur Heidi Roizen and the co-founder of the billion-dollar startup Cloudflare, Michelle Zatlin, were here to talk about their different but very common experiences in building startups into major ventures. Entrepreneurs Justin Kahn and Kim Pelese and investor Bill Reichert were here for a different reason. They were brave enough to come and talk about some pretty epic failures. We held that on the day after Halloween and called it the Day of the Dead. Kiva Executive Chair Julie Hanna discussed the 1 billion or so people around the world who were completely excluded from the digital revolution because of poverty or lack of education, and what she and Kiva are doing about it. The Drapers, Bill, Tim, and Jesse, were here with an evening of stories and experiences about being a 3-generation family in venture investing and innovation. And finally, the Exponential lineup has kicked off a 360-degree look at the transformational impact of the iPhone, socially, economically, and technologically. We began with the prehistory, computing in your pocket, which looked at the early days of mobile computing, very sophisticated, even if early, and communications with Steve Capps, Donna Dubinsky, Jerry Kaplan, and Mark Peratt. Software is at the center of our second area of expansion. In January, we unveiled a new $7 million exhibition, Make Software Change the World. Our exhibition's genius, Kirsten Tashev, who is right there in the middle on stage, highlighted the gala opening. Give it up. I hear some applause starting over there. That's good. And she explained how and why it's our most interactive exhibit to date, giving visitors a hands-on look at the revolutionary impact of software in the world. And at the heart of it is an exhibition and engaging software lab, generously made possible by trustee Ramy Stata and his family. In the fall, we dedicated our new $6 million Shustak Center, named in honor, of course, of Lynn Shustak. Inside is a major preservation lab. Go ahead. That's good. Lynn really loves the fact that Shustak Center is on the building. No, Donna's shaking her head. No, I know he doesn't, but there it is anyway, ladies and gentlemen. It's forever. Inside is a major preservation lab and digitizing operation, which helps to preserve historic code and which anchors the work of our other new center, the Center for Software History. To celebrate that center, we did a lot. This is Gary Kildall. We've obtained, this is a rowdy crowd, I love it. We've obtained the never-before-seen autobiography of Gary Kildall, and we are publishing excerpts from that online in a very revealing memoir. The center hosted more than 100 technology historians from around the country in a 2-day symposium, the first of its kind in the field and a natural magnet for further scholarship, which we are going to be unique in the world in fostering. And as part of our CHM Live series, continuing on the theme of software, GitHub co-founder and CEO Chris Wanstroth kicked off the year in January. CHM trustee Grady Booch gave the 5th of a 6-part lecture series on software, the human experience. Tom Mulaney of Software explained how code and networking are used to spy on 600 million people. That was all about China. And CHM Live looked at some key moments in history. This is David Bennett, founder of GeoCities. Anybody use GeoCities with AOL a few years ago? The pioneering forerunner to Facebook, which helped transform AOL and then sold to Yahoo for $3.5 billion. Planetary Resources CEO Chris Lewicki connected the dots between early computing and his bold new venture in asteroid mining. Historian Christophe Lecuyer looked at a dark side of Silicon Valley, the persistent problem of groundwater pollution related to the chip industry. And Dr. Sue Black explained how her single-handed Twitter campaign helped to save Bletchley Park, the shrine of World War II code breaking. It was a big year for our education program. Several thousand more kids and families experienced an introduction to the basics of code through Design Code Build, which is a joint effort of CHM and the Broadcom Foundation. This year, we launched a Mentors Edition with Big Brothers and Big Sisters and the YMCA Reach and Rise program, Coder Dojo, and Spark. And we joined the Broadcom Foundation's Broadcom Masters program to conduct a second year of Design Code Build workshops for Masters Middle School science competitors from all over the country. Our family workshop program took off. We launched a summer program and unveiled summer workshops on weekends. We launched a summer-long docent and internship for high schoolers. And our Talking to the Future program took Bay Area high school students up close and personal to technologists from NASA, Genentech, the Stanford School of Medicine, and Northwestern University. And many of these programs are run entirely, staffed entirely by our amazing volunteers who contributed 14,000 hours of service to us this year. Finally, three other really important things happened this year. First of all, we introduced Tango, an augmented reality tour of Revolution, the first 2,000 years of computing. If you haven't taken it, I hope you'll come back and grab a Tango device at the front desk and do that. We were pleased to announce that Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist John Markoff, who is here tonight, has joined us as a historian. John will lend his perspective from 30 years covering Silicon Valley and the technology world, and we've broken ground on a new $2 million education center on the first floor adjacent to the Make Software Gallery, which will introduce a whole new educational experience to Silicon Valley later this year, and we're co-designing that with our very good friends at IDEO. So I'm happy to say to our fellows, Alan, Margaret, Cleve, and Larry, this is a brief look at a year in the life of the community that you joined tonight as fellows of the Computer History Museum. You've been a part of history for a while now, and we're so delighted to welcome you as the Fellows Class of 2017.
What a great room, what a great evening, and what a great meal. Are you all enjoying the evening so far? That's fantastic. And it's just an honor and a thrill for me to be here. I'm so passionate about the Computer History Museum and the mission that we have, and this is such a fantastic event to bring it all together. So it's an honor to be here at the Computer History Museum, and Accenture is really proud to serve as the headline sponsor of the 2017 Fellow Awards and the Gala, and this is our third year of doing so. And I'm also just thrilled to be a trustee, one of the trustees of the Computer History Museum as well. And if you think about the context of it, why I'm excited and we're excited about this, is that as John and Len said earlier, we're in the midst of a technology revolution. It's a digital revolution powered by computer technology that really dazzles the imagination with the possibilities. And from my perspective, from my company, Accenture, what we do is we use that technology and apply it in our business to help improve the way the world works and lives. That's our mission, but it wouldn't be possible without the technology that we see from the fellows, the pioneers, and the technology that we see in the Computer History Museum. So our business and the amazing innovations and improvements that technology has brought to the world really wouldn't be possible without the pioneers and the inventors that bring the creativity, the passion, and the innovation that power the computer technology and all the things we see in the museum and that the fellows of the museum have brought to bear and really pioneered in the computer history revolution that we've had here, the computer technology revolution. So, and we really firmly believe and passionately believe also that we are in the midst of one of the the biggest stories, if not the biggest story of human history, in looking at how the technology revolution plays out. And the role of the Computer History Museum is essential to make sure we really do capture this moment in history, capture the history that's led us to this stage, and capture the innovation that's leading us forward to the next generation. So we celebrate the history, we celebrate these pioneers, and we look to the future, and that's why we're really proud to sponsor this gala, be here tonight, and also recognize the fellows. So on behalf of Accenture, representing almost, just over actually, 400,000 people that we have around the world, I'm delighted to welcome you tonight to this great event and to join in this celebration of history and capturing these great stories with the induction of the Computer History Museum's 2017 Fellow Award honorees. So thank you for joining us tonight. I'm thrilled to be a sponsor, and with that, I'll bring up John Huller to take us forward.
Thanks, everyone. Hey, you look great. Did you get the panorama? Did everybody check? It looks good. You should check it out. Lynn, I have the answer to how you name fellows from the podium. It's called crowdsourcing. Because if there's anyone in the room that you leave off, you immediately get 15 people coming over to your table and saying, hey, did you know? So, Gordon Bell, Federico Fagin, and John Crawford are also here tonight as fellows. Thank you, Ike Nassy, for saving my life. And thank you, Paul, for your generosity and your very gracious remarks. So this is where we do the important work, the reason we're all here tonight, which is inducting our class of 2017 into the Hall of Fellows. The theme of Fellows every year is honoring the past and inspiring the future. And both of those are represented here tonight. Part of the future here at the Computer History Museum is our Next Gen Advisory Board. It's a board of incredibly talented young entrepreneurs and investors from all over Silicon Valley who help bring that perspective into the work of the museum. And every year, one or more members of the Next Gen Board act as our representatives performing the induction of the fellows, and we continue that tradition tonight. Inducting all four of the fellows is Next Gen Board member Angela Kingyans. Angela is a principal and investor with the early stage venture capital firm Version 1 Ventures. Before that, she co-launched the Y Combinator-backed startup Insight Data Science. She holds a bachelor's, master's, and PhD from the University of Toronto, and she is an all-around great colleague. So please join me for the induction ceremony tonight in welcoming to the stage Angela Kingyans.
Thank you, John. Good evening, everyone. Hope you're enjoying dinner so far and enjoying the good company. It's an absolute honor for me to be here tonight to present these awards. Our first honoree is Alan Cooper. Alan is being recognized for his creation of the core elements of Visual Basic and for his studies on human interaction design, a field he helped define. When Microsoft combined Alan's Ruby graphical user interface construction set with their QBasic language, the end result was Visual Basic. Visual Basic was one of the most popular application development languages and environments in the 1990s, used for both personal computing and enterprise-scale applications. As a result of Alan's work, many new companies were able to deliver Windows software to the market. In 1992, Alan founded Cooper, a design and business strategy consultancy whose goal is to make organizations, products, and services more human-centered. So tonight, we honor Alan and present a short movie of his contributions to technology.
My life is filled with inflection points. I think most people tend to go on a trajectory, and my life has been more episodic. I set out to go to school to be an architect. And I had this crazy idea of paying my way through architecture school by programming computers. And as soon as I got my hands on a real computer, a real digital computer, all of a sudden I fell head over heels in love with the digital world. So a friend of mine who I had worked with at Digital Research had actually gotten a job in the sales team at Microsoft. And he was trying to convince the big IT departments that there were actually guys writing for Windows. And my buddy in Microsoft is pitching the virtues of Windows. And I was going, yeah, Windows is wonderful. And this guy was saying, our issue here is that we've got people who are senior systems analysts building systems. And we've got bank tellers who have a high school diploma. And they all have to use this system, this Windows system that you've got. Blink. There it was. I didn't want to write a shell for the expert, and I didn't want to write a shell for the beginner. I wanted to write a shell construction set. And it turned out to be really good. You know, I showed it to Adobe and Lotus and all these guys, and they all looked at it and said, this is really cool. Why don't you show it to Microsoft? So I went to my buddy Glenn and I said, can you get me an audience with Bill Gates? And he called me back a couple weeks later and he said, well, okay, you're not gonna see Gates, but you're gonna see one of his guys. I went into my little spiel, you know, giving my little demo. 5 minutes into it, he just pushed his chair back and goes, Bill's gotta see this. And I'm ushered into a big boardroom, a big table, and about a dozen Microsofties pour in. And I've got my little computer in front of me, and I start demoing this thing to Bill. It blew his mind. He'd never seen anything like it. At one point he goes, how did you do that? I go, it's magic, Bill. But we eventually signed the deal. It was going to be the front face of Windows 3.0. It got caught in a political battle within Microsoft, and it became an orphan within Microsoft. And it bounced around looking for a home within the organization. And finally, within Microsoft, the Ruby, this visual programming front end, which I had always seen as a tool for users, found this sort of strange bedfellow of QBasic, Microsoft's Basic, and then released it as Visual Basic. Microsoft developed all kinds of really cool things and ways to step through the language. It's really neat. But the basic idea that you're programming inside a visual environment, that was mine. And the basic idea that it's dynamically extensible and open to third parties, that was also my idea. And I think those were the two really significant contributions that made Visual Basic a success. I began to realize that what was really interesting to me was this idea of thinking about what software should be and how it should behave. And that was much more interesting to me than actually writing it. One day I was at a conference somewhere. I was leading a panel, and on the panel were several of my friends and colleagues from the development world. And at the end of the panel, the audience filed out, and I looked to my panelists. I said, hey, you guys, you're the first to know. I'm a consultant. I'm not going to do any coding, but I'm here to help you make your products easier to use and better. And a couple of them hired me. So I began to help them without programming. The name interaction design barely existed, okay? There were no jobs anywhere in any company called user interface design, interaction design, nothing. From the time we really began, it was 3 years. And I wrote a big fat book called About Face of everything I knew. I put it all in there, every last thing. When I was done, I said, that's it, I don't know anything else. And 3 years later, I wrote another book because I was learning so much at the time. This is Silicon Valley's Oppenheimer moment. We've created these machines that extract data from us and give us advertisements in return. And the mechanisms of civil oppression used to be guns. Today, the mechanisms of civil oppression are Facebook and Google and Uber. And we're creating those tools, us technologists and designers. And so we have to all of a sudden go, well, wait a minute, is this really what we want to build? Do we really want to create this nuclear blast? Think this through.
The 2017 CHM Fellow Award is presented to Alan Cooper for his invention of the visual development environment in Visual Basic, and for his pioneering work in establishing the field of interaction design and its fundamental tools. Please join me in welcoming Alan to the stage.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you to the Computer History Museum, Karina, Hansen. Thank my fellow honorees. I'd like to thank the sponsors, the people who nominated me. I think the Computer History Museum is a really cool place, and I'm ridiculously proud to receive this honor. This is an award that I covet. I've received other awards, but this one is one that I'm really proud. I need to hit Roger's and find some synonyms for proud. This is an award. There's so much goodness comes to people who succeed in commerce. There's so much recognition and approbation. And this is an award that goes to imagination and invention and creativity. And that's what I hold near and dear. And so it's humbling and gratifying to receive it. And my fellow honorees are people who, taught computers to do math and invented the ARPANET and sent rockets to the moon. And my goal when I started was to just do some simple business software, just accounting software. And the lasting legacy of that work was that I invented the Y2K bug. So to see the Hall of Fellows, that array of faces and all those accomplishments is it's something to live up to. What I noticed is that I'm a straight, white, old guy, male, and I see a lot of similar faces on that wall. So what I'd like to see is more representation from the underrepresented faces and voices. And that's something that I want to commit myself to in the future. It's a tough problem, but I think that there's more we can do. So I've been an entrepreneur all my life, not necessarily a successful entrepreneur, but I have, since I started delivering newspapers as a preteen, and I've started companies, and you've seen I've done stuff. I've won this award, and I'm a self-made man, and I have for many years have lived this myth of being the self-made man that I've created myself, all by myself. And like so many things that you hold near, as you reach a certain stage in your life, you realize that it was pretty much a bogus concept. And as self-made men, self-made people, rely on giant, generous support systems. And I certainly had my giant, generous support system. I mean, from the time I went to school, I went to a state college, I got a work-study job so I could, I was a computer operator, so I could spend time with the machine. And when I started my first company, I was collecting unemployment insurance and food stamps. And the civic largesse is really a lever that I use. And of course, I've had hundreds and hundreds of clients who've supported me, and many people, some here today, have nominated me for this award. And yet again, it's more support, it's more encouragement, and this is how you be a self-made man. And at my company, Cooper, that was a temporary name. We're celebrating our 25th anniversary this year, and so people at Cooper, we call them Cooperistas, old and new, many have come and gone, and they've been the ones who've embodied my vision and taken it farther than I ever could. And I need to thank them along with all the rest. And of course, nothing that I've done would have at all have been possible without the support and the love of my business partner for 25 years and my life partner for 37 years, Sue Cooper. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Congratulations, Alan. Our next fellow being honored tonight is Margaret Hamilton for her leadership of the NASA Apollo Guidance Computer Onboard Flight Software Team and a lifetime of important contributions to software engineering, a field she helped define. Working in a small group, Margaret and her team wrote the software that carried American astronauts to the moon and back, something recognized this past November by President Obama when he bestowed upon her the Presidential Medal of Freedom. After Apollo, she went on to be a key technical contributor to the Skylab and shuttle programs. In 1988, Margaret started Hamilton Technologies, Inc. to bring her method of reliable software engineering to commercial customers. Her client list reads like a who's who of top technology companies. So tonight, we honor Margaret and present a short video of her contributions to technology.
I worked for Travelers Insurance as a student actuary. One day, word was going around Travelers that there are these new things out there called computers that were going to take away all of their jobs. All the people in the Marchand machines, pretty soon they wouldn't have jobs. And so everybody was talking about it. They were scared they wouldn't have a way to make a living. But of course, it ended up being more jobs were created with the computers than there were with the Marchand machines. I worked for Professor Edward N. Lorenz. He had an LGP30 in his office, and he taught me everything he knew about the LGP30. Well, he'd hand me something saying, here's the instructions. That's what people used to do, right? So I saw they were advertising for programmers, and this is a new thing. I was hired to work on the ANFSQ7. The XD1 was the first ANFSQ7, and it was at Lincoln Labs. I found out about the Apollo program, so I thought, I guess I should delay graduate school again, because I'd like to work on this program that puts all these men on the moon. There was this one thing that they were worried about, what if the mission aborts? And everybody said, it's never going to. It just won't happen. Oh, well, good. We'll give this one to Margaret, because she's a beginner and is never going to go there anyway. And sure enough, it aborted. So it went to this program I had written, which I named Forget It. And all of a sudden, I became an overnight expert. So I concentrated on the system software and then gradually took on, in addition to the system software, the command module software. And around the Apollo 8 time, taking over all of the onboard flight software. The one thing that stood out in my mind, being in the onboard flight software, was that it was man-rated, meaning if it didn't work, a person's life was at stake, if not over. That was always uppermost in my mind, and probably many others as well. It had to be man-rated, and it had to work the first time. You had to simulate the hardware. You had to simulate, the vehicle and the world outside of it. So you had the hope that you simulated everything so it was as much like the real thing as you could get it to be. I started worrying about the astronauts. It worried me, what if there's an emergency and they didn't know it? So I had a meeting with software and hardware people. So what I wanted to do was to interrupt the astronauts to tell them there's an emergency so they'd stop doing what they're doing. So they said it can't be done. I said, why not? So I came back with a solution the next day. They thought about it and they said, I think it can be done. The hardware guys got behind it. They put the stuff into the hardware. And then the Houston guys put it into their checklist for the astronauts. They practiced. So it's in there for both the LEM and the command module in case there's an emergency, whatever it might be. Now we go to Apollo 11 and it's time to land. And all of a sudden, guess what comes up? Priority displays telling them there's an emergency. This is just before they land. And here were the things that I had wanted to do, was to warn the astronaut when there's an emergency. There were too many things going on in the computer, and the astronaut knew that he had put the switch in a position that had caused extra stuff affecting the computer. And he realized, oh yeah, and he put it back in the right place, and they landed. After the manned missions, I guess I personally just had a sense of history about wanting to not just remember things, but do something based on what lessons were learned. Just like when an error would happen, you'd find a way not to let it happen again. I got funding for this error study, we called it. We took those errors and came up with this theory of control. And there were 6 axioms having to do, at the time, with software. In fact, the more you make use of this development before the fact mechanism, that you adhere to it or make use of it, the more reliable it's going to be. I gave a talk at my college at Earlham where they want to know what is it like being in engineering field and being a woman. That it almost seemed to be worse in some ways today than it was back in the early days. When you see women not being allowed to drive in certain countries, or you see women can't become priests, and you start seeing it, and you know how I feel about system of systems and the butterfly effect or whatever. Every single one of those things impacts our culture or impacts women or minorities as to whether they can even do something or not. Because kids might think, well, I can't do that because I'm this or I'm that. Until we start making changes, until our leaders stop admiring people who do things that encourage that, we have a problem, right?
The 2017 CHM Fellow Award is presented to Margaret Hamilton for her leadership and work on software for the DoD and NASA's Apollo space missions, and for the fundamental contributions to software engineering. Please join me in welcoming Margaret to the stage.
First, I want to say thank you for this great honor. Looking back, I realize how fortunate I was to be in the right place at the right time, and to be in a field before it became a field, and to be around those from whom I have learned so much. I remember as a child the many philosophical what-if talks I had with my father and grandfather. Both taught me to question everything until answers made sense. It was Professor Lorenz at MIT in 1959 who introduced me to computers, starting with the LGP30 using hexadecimal and binary. Known for his groundbreaking work in chaos theory, he was a most humble human being, and his love for software experimentation was contagious. My interest in the subject of errors became a priority on SAGE. Programming on the first ANFSQ7 computer, the XD1, it was especially important not to make an error, because if you did, the computer would tell on you. The computer was huge. When it crashed, we heard loud siren-like and foghorn-like sounds. The operators and programmers would come running to find out whose program it was. Since it belonged to the programmer standing in front of the council, it was no secret who the guilty one was. The location of where the program halted could be found in a foot-long register on the console with its blinking and flashing lights. The next step was to write the contents of the register onto a piece of paper or whatever. Keeping track of which program caused which crash was not easy. My solution: take a Polaroid picture of each programmer posing next to his or her bug. As you can imagine, the pictures became more and more creative as time went on. We all loved to listen to the sounds of one of my programs. One night, one of the computer operators called me at home at 4 a.m. "Margaret," he said, "something terrible has happened." When I asked him what was wrong, he said, "Your program no longer sounds like a seashore." I got in the car and rushed to work. We have found a new way to debug using sound. I began to look for more ways to understand what made a particular error or class of errors happen, as well as how to prevent it from happening in the future. SAGE definitely came with drama, especially that having to do with errors. But this was only the beginning of what would come next: the Apollo onboard flight software project at MIT under contract to NASA. The challenge: build man-rated software, which meant lives were at stake, as you could see from the video. Not only did it have to work, it had to work the first time, and not only did the software itself have to be reliable, but it needed to be able to detect an error and recover from it in real time. It did not disappoint. Each mission was exciting in its own right, but Apollo 11 was special. We had never landed on the moon before. Walter Cronkite was reporting everything in great detail. Everything was going according to plan until something totally unexpected happened, just as the astronauts were about to land on the moon. I was standing in the SCAMA room listening to the conversations between the astronauts and mission control when all of a sudden the onboard flight computer became overtaxed. The software's priority displays, also known as display interface routines of 1201 and 1202 alarms, interrupted the astronauts' normal mission displays to warn them that there was an emergency, allowing NASA's mission control to understand what was happening and alerting the astronauts to place the rendezvous radar in the right position. The priority displays gave the astronauts a go, no-go decision to land or not to land. It quickly became clear that the software was not only informing everyone that there was a hardware-related problem, but that the software was compensating for it. With only minutes to spare, the decision was made to go for the landing. The rest is history. The Apollo 11's crew became the first humans to walk on the moon, and our software became the first software to land on the moon. I thought of the years that are preparing for this day and how fortunate I was to work with and share this experience with the many talented and dedicated people who made this possible. Coming up with solutions and new ideas was an adventure, and we were the luckiest people in the world. From my own perspective, the software experience itself, designing it, developing it, evolving it, watching it perform, and learning from it for future systems was at least as exciting as the events surrounding the mission. Having been through these experiences, one could not help but do something about learning from them. With initial funding from NASA and DoD, we performed an empirical study of the Apollo effort that resulted in a theory that has continued to evolve based on lessons learned from Apollo and later projects. From its axioms, we derived a universal systems language together with its automation and preventative development paradigm. We continued to discover new properties and systems defined with the language. Among other things, there are no interface errors in a system definition and its derivatives, its software being one of them, and integration within a definition and from systems to software is inherent. It became clear one day that the root problem with traditional approaches is that they support users in fixing wrong things up rather than in doing things in the right way in the first place. With a preventative paradigm, instead of looking for more ways to test for errors and continuing to test for errors late into the life cycle, the majority of errors, including all interface errors, are not allowed into the system in the first place, just by the way it is defined. Testing for non-existent errors becomes an obsolete endeavor. For whatever success I have experienced in my work, the credit goes not only to those I've learned so much from, but also to the errors I've had the opportunity of having had some responsibility in their making, without which we would not have been able to learn the things we did, some with great drama and fanfare, and often with a large enough audience to not want such a thing to ever happen again. It is safe to say that the errors that have been prevented from happening would have resulted in even greater drama had we not adhered to a philosophy of prevention before the fact. Thank you.
Congratulations, Margaret. Our next fellow honoree is Cleve Moler. Cleve is being recognized tonight for his role in developing the MATLAB programming language and development environment. Moler graduated from Stanford with a PhD in numerical analysis in 1965 under George Forsyth. His dissertation on matrices led him into a lifetime of matrix computation. First with the IcePack and LinPack benchmark suites, and then with the MATLAB Matrix Laboratory as a professor at the University of New Mexico. In 1984, Cleve and colleague John Little formed MathWorks to develop MATLAB into a commercial product. Since that time, MATLAB has become the de facto programming and simulation environment for science and engineering, with millions of users around the world. So tonight, we honor Cleve and present a short video of his contributions to technology.
I was born in Salt Lake City, Utah. I went to high school in Salt Lake City. There were a handful of us that were interested in technical pursuits. We all ended up leaving Utah to go away to school to Harvard or Stanford or Caltech. Caltech was smaller, good weather, Southern California versus winters in Boston. It was an easy decision. And I took numerical analysis from John Todd. That got me involved in the kind of mathematics that involves computing. And I got an A+, and I took advanced calculus from a guy named Knowles, and I got a B-. So that pointed my direction to the more applied aspects of mathematics. This is the only place I applied to grad school, was to go to Stanford. At Stanford, when I got there, they had a Burroughs 220. We got an IBM 7090 and also DEC's first computer, the PDP-1. So my degree is in mathematics, but my affiliation is with the computer science department there. My thesis was about matrices. That's when I was really getting involved in working with matrices. IcePack stands for Eigenvalue Package. Jim Wilkinson from National Physical Laboratory in England was the world's leading authority on matrix computation. So the IcePack project was a project to translate Wilkinson's algo programs into Fortran, where they could be widely used, and then certify that they could be used, run them on a number of different computers, and make sure that they all worked there. LinPack, the algorithms were well established, but we just wanted to produce a package of Fortran subroutines that could be used in conjunction with IcePack. LinPack accidentally sort of became a benchmark. When we did the original testing of LinPack, we sent the programs to a couple of dozen universities and laboratories and asked them to run all their programs to make sure it'd work on their computers. We also asked them to time one program. And Dungaric kept track of those times, and they became the LinPack benchmark. Today, LinPack is known as a benchmark. While I was working on LinPack and IcePack, I was also teaching courses at the University of New Mexico, and I wanted to have my students be able to use LinPack and IcePack without writing Fortran programs. So I wrote the first version of MATLAB as a kind of simple calculator. Two companies in Palo Alto that had spun off the Stanford EE department developed commercial products using my MATLAB as the basis. With my permission, I was excited about them doing it. One of those products was a product called Control-C, and the control engineer that developed was a guy named Jack Little. Little came to me in 1983 and said he wanted to start a company based on MATLAB. And I said, great, let's do it. We started MathWorks in California in 1984. There are several aspects of MATLAB that made it catch on. First of all, the mathematics, the computation with matrices and the computation with differential equations. Another aspect of it was the interactivity. We just take that for granted today, where everybody has their own laptop. But back then, people were still submitting batch jobs to central computer centers in their laboratory or university. What's the most remarkable thing is an easy answer. It's how much it's permeated into all these different enterprises. Hearing aids, DNA, finance. Rover running around on Mars has software generated by MATLAB controlling it. The satellite that flew past Pluto, they had to adjust its orbit. So they simulate that in MATLAB and adjust the orbit and then send up new instructions. When I get an award, it's an award for MATLAB more than just a personal award for me. So those are proud moments.
The 2017 Computer History Museum Fellow Award is presented to Cleve Moler for his creation and development of the MATLAB numerical computing environment and programming language. Please join me in welcoming Cleve to the stage to accept his award.
Well, that video took away most of what I was going to say. So let me begin by just saying what a joy it is to be here, to tour the museum. It's been years since I'd been here, and to meet my fellow awardees. There's some very interesting people over there, and I really enjoyed being with them this afternoon. So thanks for that. I'm a mathematician. I just renewed my passport, and on the application for a passport where it says occupation, I put down mathematician, just to be kind of provocative. But I wondered how many fellows have been mathematicians, and I looked through the list. And people studied mathematics, but the only two that I could find that got PhDs in mathematics were John McCarthy and Don Knuth. Those are the only mathematicians who've been awardees. I saw Don at the reception, and I asked him if he calls himself a mathematician. And I said, no. He said, no. I said, what do you call yourself? He says, I'm a writer. And then we both agreed that the title we both like is programmer. So that's what I am. Okay, I got to tell a story about Knuth. I go off record here. My ex-wife was a counselor, and her family there was a cousin of his being committed to a mental institution, and they asked her to help him go there. And she saw him and he says, what can we get for you? And he says, I just need two things, a Rubik's Cube and my copy of Knuth. That's all you need for a complete life. So, I want to politely say that the kind of mathematical computing, scientific computing that I represent and that MATLAB represents is not really well represented here at the museum and among the fellows. I like to say that we use computers for what God intended, to do arithmetic. But we've gone way beyond that now. And I want to tell you a little bit about MATLAB and how we're not just a matrix laboratory anymore. We mentioned the LINPACK benchmark. LINPACK is a predecessor to MATLAB. It's now known as a benchmark, but it was a software library before it was a benchmark. It's no longer really relative. It's the basis for deciding what's the fastest computer in the world. I don't know if you realize that. The top 500 is done by basis on the LINPACK benchmark. So I wrote the first LINPACK benchmark, not as a benchmark, but as software for solving linear equations. Today it's kind of out of date. Doesn't really represent mainstream computing anymore. It's sort of like the home run derby or the slam dunk contest of professional sports. It's interesting to keep track of, but it doesn't represent what really makes a winning team. But MATLAB's not used at supercomputer centers anymore. We're not used where the LINPACK benchmark is. We're used lots of other places. And let me tell you one story that represents how MATLAB is used. Until late last year, the only music album of a live Beatles concert you could get was from Hollywood Bowl in 1964. They did a concert there, and it was recorded on 3-track tape, and they made an album out of it, but the sound is lousy. Mostly you hear girls screaming. You can't hear the Beatles. Last year, Giles Martin, who was the son of George Martin, the Beatles producer, and an sound engineer named James Clark, reissued the Beatles' Hollywood Bowl album. Clark took studio recordings of the Beatles and made mathematical models of the individual performers, Lennon and Ringo and so on. And then he was able to take the Hollywood Bowl, this was based on mathematics, Fourier transforms, spectrograms, filters. And then he was able to take the Hollywood Bowl concert and carve out the individual performers and provide a sound engineer with what he needed to remaster the tapes, putting in whatever combination of them he wanted. There's still some girls screaming in it, but not as much. And that album was issued in September last year. That's a... We had a company meeting yesterday, and Little at this point played some of it, but I can't do that here. So that represents MATLAB in a little nugget there of where it's impacted impact to the public. You saw the Mars rover and the the Pluto flyby on the video. That's all based on something we called model-based design, where engineers developing lots of kinds of things that have embedded electronics sits at terminals like the rest of us and run mathematical models of whatever they're designing, whether it's a car or a satellite flying past Pluto. They then generate the code that runs in the embedded processors on the objective vehicle. So MATLAB isn't running in your car, but code generated by MATLAB is controlling the electronics in your car. Tesla and Toyota are big customers of ours. A German company named Lilium just demonstrated a flying car, first car that actually flew with vertical takeoff and landing. And that's all running on MATLAB generated code. Speech processing, image processing, the Netflix fries on viewer preference, hot items like big data, machine learning, Hadoop, autonomous vehicles. MATLAB is involved in this. Tell you one big data story. A colleague was just at a big data conference in Texas where Dell was giving away T-shirts that says, in Texas, we just call it data. And then engineering education. If you study engineering at any school, college, and around the world today, you use MATLAB in your coursework. All these applications are things that we didn't target, but they're all based on, we had no idea. I had no idea. I didn't know anything about control theory or signal processing when we started this whole business. But it's all based on the mathematics that's in MATLAB and the array programming features that have made it useful. Jack Little was mentioned. Jack Little is the father. I'm the father of MATLAB, but Little's the father of MathWorks. He's run the company. I haven't had a thing to do with his success. I'd have messed it up. So thanks, Jack. Thanks to the 4,000 other math workers around the world that have helped make this possible. Thanks to my wife, Patsy, who couldn't be here tonight. And thanks to my family, some of whom sitting here in table 5. And thanks to the museum. Thank you very much.
Congratulations, Cleve. Our final honoree tonight is Larry Roberts, who is being honored tonight for his pivotal work in the evolution of computer networking. Larry's early networking experiments in 1966 led to his role as technical architect for the ARPANET, a key stepping stone for what we know as the internet today, and the first major packet-switched network. In 1974, he co-founded Telenet, a pioneering packet-switched commercial network and equipment manufacturer, and played a fundamental role in creating the X25 networking standard. Since Telenet's IPO and acquisition at the end of the 1970s, he has led several other networking companies. So tonight we honor Larry and present a short movie of his contributions to technology.
I was technically capable and provided with equipment to do whatever I wanted to study science, and that was certainly my intention, and my parents guided me. I built a big Tesla coil to make big sparks, and I did induction heating like they're starting to use now in kitchens. I proved that that worked, and I built our first TV because TVs were just becoming available. And I built a whole series of things when I was a kid. My parents were both PhD chemists, and that was sort of a rule in the family. Everybody should be a PhD. My mother was not able to work because of the theories at the time. So she took on other things like running the Girl Scouts and running everything around. My mother ran Girl Scout camps. One of them, when I was in college, needed a telephone system. And so I went to the junkyard and picked up old transistors and built a transistorized computer exchange, which may have been one of the first in history. I was interested in electronics in particular, and wanted to continue in that field. I thought it was the most, would have the biggest change in the world coming. I did my thesis work on the TX2 at Lincoln. In the middle of my thesis work, Wes Clark left, and so did Papian, who was the head of the group, and Bill Papian, they left together. And so there was no leadership to the group, basically. And I just sort of took over managing all the people. They gave me the job of making the TX2 from a bare machine with no software to build the software, to build the operating system and the compilers and everything. So I built all the software up from the ground for the time-sharing system and for the compiler and assembler and up from a plug board. Lick was talking about, we were talking about what's the next thing, where was the next challenge and so on. And he was talking about his thoughts about needing a network. I decided that looking at networking next would be a quite attractive field because it could go somewhere quickly. At that point, Ivan was in the government taking Lick's place in DARPA, and he gave me a contract because I asked to do this, to work on testing this theory of what we needed to do the network, working with some programmers I hired with Tom Merrill from his group. And we built a network between Lincoln Labs and SDC in California. That showed that we could easily make the computers work together quite effectively. We could send a program to, or enter a program or do whatever we want with the other computer at the other end. We could just log in and do things. So I was convinced that I should go to ARPA, and I then moved my family and went to work in the Pentagon. In DARPA, Bob was the director. I was chief scientist to something or other, and ran the program in the office because I was the technical math computer person. The first activity was to get all of the universities and research sites to agree on this and to participate, because you can't build a network and have something happen unless something will happen with it. So what happened at the end of ARPA? My 6 years, I figured that was enough at any one place. We started Telenet downtown San Francisco because we'd be near the FCC and near the AT&T's digital center. The design of Telenet was to build a network where it was also a little bit like NCP in that we managed all of the interfaces and knew what they were. I knew I had to have a standard interface, and so the first thing I did was to write a protocol, X25, and go to CCITT and working with British Telecom and Bell Canada and Japan, put together a proposal to put that into the CCITT so that we would have a standard. That went in record time almost, and I think it was in '75 that we got the standard finalized and built our own switch to do it much more efficiently. I sold equipment to BT and to Canada. Our equipment worked beautifully, and the result was the network worked extremely well. I think that people shouldn't just look at the internet and say, who are the fathers of the internet? That's a false concept. I mean, a number of us worked on it. There's things you have to understand from the past of why we did things, and maybe they shouldn't have done that way anymore. Maybe they should be revisited from time to time, and so we need to have that history and understand it.
The 2017 Computer History Museum Fellow Award is presented to Larry Roberts for his contributions to human and machine communications and for his role in the development of the ARPANET and the X25 protocol. Please join me in welcoming Larry to the stage to accept his award.
Well, this is quite an honor, and I thank all of you and Computer Museum for this honor. If I go back in history and look at some of the things that I did that weren't mentioned totally here, one of the things that comes to my mind is that my first program that I wrote that was on the TX0, the predecessor of the PDP-1, was one that is now become very popular, and that's a neural net that I did with handwriting recognition. It worked extremely well in the high 90s, and I did that back on a machine with practically no memory. But in any case, that concept was at the time poo-pooed by my artificial intelligence friends, Mervyn Minsky and John McCarthy, because it wasn't what they were doing with artificial intelligence at the time. Of course, it is now the underlying deep learning we're using today for improving artificial intelligence. I moved from that to 3D graphics and became the one that started and did the first three-dimensional graphics stuff. We have in the museum the virtual reality setup that Ivan and I did with that three-dimensional display and hidden line elimination, in which I used, I took and did the first projective geometry process of moving it into from early history of math in Germany to matrix math, where I did a four-dimensional transformation to do projective displays, which is what everybody uses today. The concept there was, at that time, what I realized was that was so early in the history that I thought that this technology won't be commercially viable for the population to use for 20 years or more, and it wasn't. And so I decided that wasn't what I was going to spend my time. I was going to move to something new, and in talking to Licklider and Corbato at the computer conference, which I did, Licklider convinced me that we did need a network to connect all the computers together. And the reason that resonated with me is it had taken me about 3 months of work to move some photographs that I had on the TX2 at Lincoln Lab to Minsky's lab, because he wanted the photographs for his work. And we didn't have a way to communicate them because the computers were totally independent and different from each other, even though actually both were designed by Lincoln people, because the PDP-1 was similar to the TX2, but they were totally incompatible. So I had to buy an IBM tape drive, connect it to the computer, and then send him an IBM tape. It was a very difficult process compared to a network. And that's really what drove me to do the network, because I realized how hard it was going to be in the future for people to communicate between each other, between all these machines that weren't necessarily compatible, and to communicate rapidly and do it efficiently and just send them the pictures. So I worked on that process, and then, as you've heard, I went to, was blackmailed actually by Bob Taylor to go down to ARPA and do the program and get the network designed and built. And so then what that proved to me was that it was tremendously more economic and tremendously more responsive than circuit switching was. And that was the huge difference. I couldn't convince AT&T of that. Even after I finished the network, had it working, demonstrated, and was about to leave ARPA, I got AT&T involved because they provided us the trunks. And I said, would you like to take it over for free? We'll give you all the equipment. You can bill us for all our sites, and you can sell it to other people then and make it a national communications capability. They refused. And it took them a long time. They spent a lot of people on it, and it was a careful decision for some reason. But both DCA in the government and AT&T and anyone else was unwilling to consider packet switching as being a media that was reasonable. All the packets would fall on the floor just like paper tape did. So I went to the commissioner at the FCC and Bernie Strasberg, and I said, I can't seem to get people to take this on, and it won't become a useful activity unless other people do. The government can't do it all by itself. And what Bernie said, well, we've changed the rules, start a carrier. So that's what Telenet was. And so I started a carrier, which was working under the common carrier rules, which everybody has complained about. And in fact, there was no problem at all, because the common carrier rules have one great benefit to the carrier. You can't be sued. You're not at fault for anything except losing the revenue that they paid you. So it was actually a good protection. We, in fact, had to work right next to the FCC because the FCC was being bombarded by AT&T every week or so. We'd have to run down to the FCC and find out the latest problems that were being generated and
write our own rebuttals to it all because we were being tried to be pushed out of the market. But it worked, and we eventually moved out of the city, and so we didn't have to deal with the traffic all the time. But that was the life then. MCI and us and Telenet both had to live right next to the FCC to make it work. One of the things that I'm best known for by the group that took the pictures and the group that I was just working with of the rest of the honorees was that I was known as the kid who first made nitroglycerin when he was in first grade. And actually that was because my parents were chemists and all the materials were around and so were the books. Anyway, I think that the capabilities that we see today are so profound and so important, but there's still work to do because the network is winding up at a place where we still have huge capacity in the network. It's the fibers are running at hundreds of gigabits, and can you send a file at 100 gigabits? There's no way. The problem today is that we're working at a very slow pace across the network with how we can use it. And that's really because the network has no intelligence. It's a dumb network. And I think that's a problem we still have to solve. Because there's no way at the moment to push a thread through the network as we're doing and keep it going at the speeds we'd like to be using today. With the clouds, when we're using clouds, the bandwidths that we'd like to be using would be in the gigabits, not the megabits. So there's a huge difference between what we can do today and what we would like to be doing. And so I still see work ahead in the future for all of us in the networking field. Thank you very much for your for the award and for your attention and everything else. Thank you very much.
Barry, Alan, Cleve, Margaret, thank you so much. What an inspiring evening, and to think that they're still thinking of problems to be solved in ways that they can improve so much of what we do. Ladies and gentlemen, the after party starts now. It's in the lobby and under the tent. We have cordials and champagne and lots of dessert and coffee and cigars and all kinds of good fun, dancing and music. It's the after party to end all after parties. Thank you so much for being here for dinner. Please join us downstairs and have a great evening.